says it's recording. Now that's recording. And now this is recording. Alright. So now I just need to open the PowerPoints.
So this one goes to your online class?
So I have back layers upon layers of backup here. So I have an MP4 that's recording the video from that camera and the audio from this microphone. And then there's another microphone there in the ceiling that it's supposed to be recording. And then I have an Opto that's recording the screen capture too, along with the camera and the audio. But I've never used Panopto before, so we're going to see if this works. You know, technology's great if it works. You just never know.
I know.
Alright, let's start from the beginning. And I'm not sure that this computer has enough processing power to do all this stuff. I think it's a 8088 processor or something. 386. Okay. So, welcome back to biology. We left off last time, introducing the class and talking about Canvas and stuff like that. We really didn't get much chance to talk any biology, so we're going to start from the beginning. This is a biology class, right? And so, what does that mean? What are we going to study? Life, right? In fact, the root is bios, which is life, and ology means to study. So remember the Greek and Latin theme that we're going to continue during this semester. So literally, biology is the study of life. So if we know that we're going to study life, but the question is, what is life? Anything that takes in oxygen? What about the bacteria that don't need oxygen, called anaerobes? Are they not alive? So reproduction, right? We talked a little bit about. You guys should think about what is involved in living things. So we got to figure out what life is before we can even start the class, because life really isn't that easy to define, is it? I mean, is it everything has to breathe oxygen? Well, no. Does my photocopier reproduces?
Anything that takes space.
But it has to reproduce on its own.
This is taking space. It's alive.
Would it be that it has to reproduce on its own?
This is alive too. What?
It has to reproduce on its own.
Okay. What if I built a robot that built other robots exactly like it? Is that alive? Okay.
It has carbon in it. It looks like it has carbon in it.
So does your pencil lead. Okay. So cells, right? Cells are defined as the smallest unit that has all the chemical and physical properties that make something alive. But that brings us back to the beginning, which is, what is life? Right? So reproduction. Why is that important for life?
Because everything eventually dies if we can't reproduce.
So that's right? If there was no such thing as death, we really wouldn't need reproduction, right? If we were immortal. Is that possible?
Life has been.
What do you guys think? Okay, so evolution, that's good. So I want to get back to reproduction though, and I'm not sure if this is going to screw up this recording or not. may make this computer blow up. Alright, I'm going to do a Google search. Maybe we're on dial-up. I'm not sure. Oh, that's a surprise. Google doesn't like me to use Microsoft. I would use Chrome. Alright, so here we are, this website, right, it's called Clonaid. You guys heard of it? What do you think it does? Yeah, so this is a group of people that believe, you know, I'm not judging them, but they believe that we were visited by aliens millions of years ago, and they gave us the technology to clone ourselves so that we could raise clones and take the information out of our brains and put them into our clones forever and ever and ever so that we would never die. Right? And they're called Raelians. This is a real group. And we know that cloning's possible, right? Because they're clones that walk among us. What are they called? Twins, right? Not doppelgangers. Twins, right? Genetic. So a clone is a genetic copy of something. And they've cloned sheep, right? Sheep was the first one. They cloned cats. They cloned dogs. Do you know what the cat's name is? CC the copycat. I didn't make it up. I didn't clone the cat. So why couldn't they clone humans? These people claim that they have already.
So what makes you human is your psychology, not your biology. Because what makes me me and makes her is experiences in their life. So you can't put a clone into the same experiences and expect them to be like you.
But what if you could take all of your memory, right, out of your brain and erase your clone's memory and then transfer all of your memory into their brain?
You're never evolving. You're just the same person over and over again.
Well, that's true, but you wouldn't need to reproduce because you'd just be growing clones, I guess.
Boring.
So anyway, the topic of cloning, right? You guys know that the Japanese are going to clone a woolly mammoth, or attempt to clone a woolly mammoth. Yeah, so they found the DNA. And do you know how cloning works? Right, so you take a fertilized egg and you take the DNA out of it. It's really easy to do. You know, anybody can do it. And then you just take DNA from another cell, any cell, right, you or whatever, and put it into that egg. And then you need a surrogate, and then you grow it up and it's born, and that's a clone. All right, so if I wanted to clone Michael Jordan or a racehorse, I just take the DNA out of a fertilized egg and put Michael Jordan's DNA in there and then put it in.
Would they need a mammoth egg?
So you don't need a mammoth egg. Yeah, so they're going to use an elephant egg. That's exactly right.
So
And
they're gonna have alpha.
no, because all the DNA is 100% mammoth, right? The mother elephant is just a surrogate. The egg is just a vehicle for cloning, right?
But it does. Then it's one person. Once it's born, it's gonna have its own experiences. It won't be the same. It won't be exactly.
Oh, so you're back with the Raelians, not on the mammoths, right? Because you're not worried about the mammoth's experiences.
The mammoth is great, but I'm just thinking, like, even that mammoth isn't going to be the mammoth that they took the DNA from. It's going to be...
Right. So a clone is just a genetic copy of something, right? That's like saying identical twins, even though they're identical copies. Technically, their clones are not going to have different experiences or memories or be different from one another. I mean, we're not all a product of our genetics, are we? If you have two identical twins and you starve one, right, and it lives in poverty and stuff like that, and you have another one that, eats whatever it wants, and, one's going to be healthier, probably grow bigger and taller, as opposed to the other one who may not be as healthy, right, and may have, differences. So we're not just a product of our DNA, we're also a product of our environment too. Just like intelligence. Is that all from genetics? Well, I mean, it's basically, how much of your intelligence is genetic and how much is it from you learning stuff? If you were born genetically from, I don't know, a fusion of Einstein and Hawking and, Curie or whatever, and I dropped you off in the middle of the rainforest when you were born, would you be intelligent?
You may have good instincts, but...
So, or if I put you through all the best schools, would that be the same if you're a clone from that? So, you got to keep that in mind, right? We're not all genetics. We're not all products of genetics. So anyway, back to the Raelians, they have services. You guys are interested in ordering a clone? Here's a contact form. You might laugh though, but this is an actual machine. So once you take the DNA out and you put new DNA in, the hardest part of this cloning process is to get that cell to start dividing again, to keep growing, right? So that machine right there is one that we would use in a lab to stimulate that now cloned egg to start dividing again, to make a cloned person, right? So you could buy that and then do it in your garage if you want.
But you were saying that they can't do humans, right?
I didn't say they couldn't do humans. I just said nobody. Yeah, these people claim that they've cloned 5 humans already. Right, so they won't allow anyone to do any genetic testing. So there's no way to really verify. So really, what it comes down to is, do you trust the Raelians are doing what they said? Is it possible? Should we not do it? Should we do it? Is it terrible?
I know that there's places out there that, like the male decides the sex of the offspring. They go in and they extract either a white sperm or an egg sperm just to make a male or a female offspring.
Yeah, well, it's you. You determine the sex of your offspring, because either you contribute a Y chromosome or an X chromosome.
Yeah, because so how is that different in cloning? Because if you have a male offspring, they go and just grab your egg sperm, put it in there, and you get a boy.
Right. Well, people choose. You can choose the sex. If you guys don't know this, they can take a centrifuge and spin it. They can spin sperm in a centrifuge. The ones that are X go to the bottom of the centrifuge. We're going to use the centrifuge later. And the Y ones go to the top. Why is that, you think? Because the X chromosome is much larger, and we'll learn that in chapter 14. So because it's larger, it's heavier, so it comes out first. So then you could take the sperm from the top and make a boy, or the ones from the bottom and make a girl. Right? But you can't choose everything else, right? It's really hard. Yeah.
But still, it's the same clone.
Well, I don't think so. A clone is a genetic, that would be like if you had a kid that looked exactly like you versus a boy and a girl. It's not really
Say that
the same.
That white sperm makes the offspring look exactly like clone and pick the same
Well,
Y.
that wouldn't, because you're a product of all of your. You have 30,000 genes. The Y chromosome only has like 10 that are functioning. So, I mean, theoretically, that's not very possible. But, it's okay. You can think what you want. I'm not going to judge you.
I'm just thinking that,
So, can I ask a random question?
Yeah.
Why is the female sperm not supposed to differentiate this? Why do they wait?
Because the X chromosome is bigger than the Y chromosome, so it weighs more.
But why? Like, I was just wondering, it doesn't say pretty much the same DNA, pretty much the same makeup. Like, why would it end up being larger than that? I mean, it's at that stage. There's just
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, it's a minute difference, but I can separate out things between like high density lipoprotein (HDL). You guys probably heard of that. That's the good cholesterol, and LDL, which is the bad cholesterol. And those are only a couple molecules different, right? Chromosomes are made up of hundreds of millions of molecules. But I'll show you a picture because I don't want you to leave unsatisfied. So I'll show you the difference between them in an actual chromosomal squash. So this is a karyotype, and we're going to talk about the word karyo in a minute. But a karyotype is actually what they call a nucleus. So the word karyote actually comes from nucleus. So if you wanted to test to see if your child had an extra chromosome, right, like Down syndrome, they would take a cell and do this. So it's called karyotyping. And I just have to remember what chapter this is in. I think it's 12. So this is a karyotype, right? This is the X chromosome. So a female has 2 of these. And so you could see where having 2 of these would cause you to weigh more. That's literally, millions of atoms more than this one. So you could easily spin that in a centrifuge and separate those out based on their mass. Because the Y chromosome's tiny, right? And that's why you don't have many genes to contribute. There's not, it really, we'll talk about this later, but everyone is predisposed to become female. Right? So if you could have an XY and have a defect on your Y chromosome, and it wouldn't trigger the mechanisms required to make you male. So by default, we're all female.
so that's why you're more likely to look because you're your mom's side.
Where'd you come up with this? I never heard that.
They say it's like you're more likely to look like a boy, or more likely to look like your
I never heard that. Yeah. In fact, I have a cousin who married this crazy dude, and he didn't even want to try to have a girl, right? He wanted a boy, so she agreed to do it, and they did. Their first kid was genetically chosen as a male.
I think it's different bands for you to
All right.
Some people can't help it, like he kept having girls, like
Right. Well, I mean, that sort of thing has started. It started the Russian Revolution, right? So you guys you heard of Anastasia, and so Tsar Nicholas II had 4 girls and 1 boy. So back then they considered the boys the heirs, right? If you had a girl, then you couldn't inherit the throne, and that was changed in England with the queen or whatever. But so that one boy had a genetic condition we'll talk about in chapter 13 and 14 called hemophilia, and that caused him to, if you get cut, your body doesn't produce the proteins required to stop the bleeding. Well, there's a guy named Rasputin who would put on leeches and do all this stuff and do transfusions, and basically would keep the kid alive. So the Tsar transferred all the power to this guy Rasputin, who abused it and basically started the Bolshevik, the Russian Revolution. And it's because he wanted to save that one male, because that was the only one he had. So, and he had, 4 girls first, and then the boy was the last one. They all ended up dying, right? Anastasia and the family from that. But
Well, they were in theater.
all right, yeah, she's still alive, and so is Elvis. All right, so let's get back on topic here. So reproduction is a good one, right? That's one of the requirements for life. What else? Respiration. So why do we breathe? What's respiration for? Right? So we breathe air to produce our energy. Our energy is in the form of adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. And you guys will learn this in chapter 9 and 10. This we'll talk about in chapter 12 and 13. So you breathe air, and then what is your energy source? I'm pretty sure you can't live if I just gave you a tank of oxygen. That you would. Okay, sugars are one, so that's something we can use as a nutrient. That's carbohydrates are sugars, right? It's just a different. So food in the form of carbs and protein, good. And what else? Lipids, right? Good. And then the fourth one that you can live off of, it's alcohol. It's true. So those are the 4 things that you could use as an energy source, and they have different kinds of energy. We'll talk about all this stuff in chapter 5, 6, maybe a little bit in 3. But just like, your gasoline, do you know where it comes from? Is there like a gasoline well that they pump out of the ground?
Photosynthesis.
Not gasoline isn't made from photosynthesis. No, gasoline, you put in your car. It comes from oil, right? Crude oil. So can you pour crude oil in your gas tank and make it go? No. And it's the same thing with your body, right? Your body can't use this directly as an energy source any more than your car can use crude oil as an energy source. It has to be refined. So this is required to make that, just like crude oil in a refinery is required to make gasoline. Your body runs on ATP, not the food you eat or the air you breathe, but that's required to make your energy source, which is ATP. Right? That's the gas for your body. Any questions about that? So this process of converting energy is called, anybody know? Glycolysis is part of it. Glyco means sweet, and lysis means to break apart. So glycolysis is breaking apart sugars. Yeah, this is metabolism. Right. And so there's metabolism that builds things up. Right? Remember what anatomy, the word? Yeah, it means, yeah. So there's anabolism, and that's if you're taking in stuff and building it up, right? Like Hans and Franz. there's catabolism, which breaks things down, right? Your body has to break things down too. So like these are energy transformation. And we're going to talk about that in chapter 8. Good. So we have to do energy conversion. But that in and of itself isn't enough. Like the Hoover Dam makes energy, but is that alive? Is that baby chicken alive? What about that as a lower left? What is that?
Bacteria.
Yeah, E. coli. Escherichia coli. What is that? It is alive. It's a bacteria. You know where it got its name? So coli is from colon. That's good. And Escherichia is from Escherichia, who's the doctor that discovered it in people's colons. So they named it after him, and his mom's really proud of that. Listen. Alright. So this is alive, right? It's a unique group of organisms that we call bacteria, and they don't have a nucleus. So the word for nucleus, right? Remember that's from the karyotype, that's karyote, and then before is pro, so prokaryotes mean before nucleus, right? We are eukaryotes because U means true, and we have a nucleus. So true nuclei versus pronuclei. Did I tell you guys? I think that I told my other class. I don't think I told you guys, but my parents came and visit me and my sister and stuff, and we went down to Karchner Caverns. Have you guys been to that? So it's like between. I think it's a little past Tucson, right? Towards. Yeah, Tombstone. And so I'm sitting there, and the guide comes in from the Geological Service, and he's like, "You excited? This is a living cave." And I was like, "What? It's a living?" He's like, "Yeah, it's alive. The cave is alive." What? Well, okay, so what's your definition of life? Well, it's alive because it's. Do you know why? What he said? The rocks are growing. They are. They're growing. Is it alive? But growth and development is part of a definition we would need for life, right? All of you guys came from a single cell, right? A fertilized egg. You weren't printed in a 3D printer, I assume. And so you had to grow into what you are. So one question, do all of your cells have the same instruction set, the same DNA, or are they different? How many people think they're the same? How many people think they're different? So the people that think that all the DNA is the same, that is correct. All of your DNA is the same. It's just like your television. So all TVs are the same, right? They have 3 pixels. Well, unless you have a fancy sharp one with the pink, the magenta. But they all have red and green and blue, right? That doesn't mean that you have to stare at a red or a green or a blue screen, does it? They can change the pixels so that you can see different images, just like this is doing right now. So just like a TV set can change the expression of its pixels, you can change the expression of your genes. So your heart cell has the same instruction set, but it's expressing those genes differently than, say, your brain cell or your lung cell, right? But they all have the same instruction book, and that's important. Any questions about that? No? All right. So we grow, we develop. Speaking of this, you ever heard the old adage, what came first, the chicken or the egg? What came first? So that's not the question, right? It's a chicken or an egg. What is it? No, not. That's not an answer. It's either a chicken or an egg. All right. So think about this. You're a sperm and an egg that's fused together, right? That's how you started. Everyone in here started that way, like it or not.
If it's just the egg, then who's going to sit on the egg? Chicken has to be there. So chicken lays the egg, sits on the egg.
Well,
chicks come out.
your answer is correct, but your logic may be somewhat flawed. All right. So we all came from a fertilized egg, right? And so the question is, how did your head know to be here, right? And your eyes know to be here, and your ears and nose there. Why don't you have a nose on your neck? Why don't you have eyes on your feet? So if the DNA is all the same, how would one cell know differently from another cell? How would you came from one cell, right? At what point does it say, hey, you guys go over there and make a heart, right? You guys, need to head upstairs and make a brain. And the answer is it can't and it doesn't. But the egg that the chicken or your mother or whatever organism it is makes cells that direct that. So they're called nurse cells. And they send out a signal that says make this side a head and make this side a tail. And we'll talk about this too when we talk about developmental biology. But without the nurse cells, you would just be a big blob and you would never know. In fact, we've done experiments where we've taken those away, and guess what? On fruit flies, they end up with two butts, right? Or two heads, because it doesn't know how to differentiate one from another. So then what would have to come first? There you go. Now you can tell your mom that you know the answer to that. No. It's kind of frowned upon to experiment on humans. Yeah, we try to forget about that. But no, that's true. Not that I know of. There's no scientific evidence that we know of that anyone's done that. So, if it did happen, it would end up as an aborted fetus. So you probably wouldn't know the difference unless you were. It would take some serious, horrific human experiments to come up with that. So I'm not sure that anyone would feel okay doing that, except maybe one person. The aliens, you never know with those people. They're a little odd. All right. So, what else can you guys come up with? Well, no, trees don't move, so they're still alive, so that's not really a requirement. Growth, we got that one. So that's metabolism.
What about aging? Is that considered growth?
I would say so. Anything else?
No.
Would evolution be considered?
Well, no, it's actually different. So let's talk a little bit about this terrible, awful word, evolution. What does it mean? Does it mean we came from monkeys? What does evolution mean?
Changing.
It means you change. And evolution basically means that it's not like you're gonna evolve on your own, right? It's not like all of a sudden you're gonna sprout wings and fly away. This is like based on generation, things that are passed down. So it's change, and basically, if you want to break it down, it's a change in your DNA, like your genetic code, your genetic cookbook over time. And that's what it is. So, did you change, or are you the same as your parents? Do you have the exact same DNA as, say, if you're a male, your father? Or a female, your mother?
Would the combination create your own set of DNA?
I would, yeah, I'd say that's true. So, is that unique? Does anyone else have that combination of DNA? Not unless you're an identical twin. So, then I would say you've evolved, right? And, we know for a fact that things evolve, right? Did you guys know that all dogs came from wolves? Does a Chihuahua look like a wolf? Well, then it evolved, for better or worse. Does a Great Dane look like a wolf? Then it evolved too, right? You guys evolve, right? The human population is getting taller, right? Why is evolution important? Why is it important to survival? Yeah, adapting to the changing environment. So, what do you think of in the next ice age? Like, let's say we weren't smart enough to, skin animals, and who do you think would survive? The people that were hairy or the people that were not? Yeah, people that are hairy, right? So, on a molecular level, we can talk about HIV. So what if HIV, the outbreak came about in the 1500s? What would happen then? There's no medicine. They cut off your hand with a saw, like a rusty saw. So we could go extinct as a species, right? And actually, this is a result of the bubonic plague. But there's in the T cells, there's a receptor called CCR5. CC is chemokine, and that stands for receptor, and that's just a number. HIV has a design in it that makes it fit exactly into that receptor. So the cell thinks it's pulling in something harmless, this chemokine, right? This chemical kind that helps regulate the cell. But it's not, right? It's pulling in the virus, which kills the T cells, and so you don't have an immune system. That's why it's called AIDS, right? Acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. But some people have a mutation. They've evolved this, right? It's just evolution is just a change in your DNA code, and that's what controls the shape of this, so that it's, let's say it's a square. It's not really, but it's good for our purposes. So the round peg doesn't fit in the square hole, right? So now the virus, even if you have it, can't get into your system. Some people are literally immune to HIV. Yeah, so they can carry the virus in their system. I don't think it can survive very long, but they can't actually get AIDS because it doesn't infect their T cells. Right. The original so the bubonic plague used this exact same pathway. That's why it killed people. So people that have this mutation are probably left over from the survivors from the bubonic plague in the Middle Ages. And if you look at human population, our history of human population, so this is the number of people, and this is the number of people, and this is time, right? So this is going to the present. It looks like this, right? And around the 1500s, you get this giant drop. What is that? Yeah, this is the Black Death of the bubonic plague. And then it comes back up, and then in the 70s and 80s, you get another sort of dip. And what's that from?
What year?
So in the 80s, roughly the early 80s. And that's from HIV. And now there's another threat that's around, right? You guys anyone been listening to the news? Yeah. So I just heard on the way in here that the CDC predicts in the next 6 months that not 3,000 people that have Ebola, but 20,000. What if that thing evolves so it can jump through the air and not through fluids?
But did they cure Ebola in one person?
So they're not sure. What they did was they put antibodies into their system that were developed outside. But this is tricky, right? When you're dealing with viruses, right? Right. So yeah, most vaccines rely on your immune system, right? It's not something killing the virus. It's in helping you to kill the virus, right? So I don't know. It's a little sketchy. All right. Anything else?
So with like this is a mom that has a nurse cell work, is that how like someone evolves? Is like do they just decide to direct it differently like in the egg stage or
No. So in order for evolution to occur, it has to change the DNA in some way. So, you can get changes in your DNA. I mean, you guys know that changes in your DNA can lead to mutations, and mutation leads to, anyone know? Well, yeah. Cancer, right? So what things could change your DNA? Radiation? Smoking? You had certain chemicals, and your body has to copy 3 billion letters. I don't know if you know this, but if your textbook had 3 billion letters in it, it would be 25 stories tall. So imagine having to copy that letter for letter every time you make a new cell, right? You got to copy the DNA. Letter for letter, how many mistakes do you think you would make? So each one of those mistakes is a mutation too. So it just happens because nobody's perfect, not even your body copying your DNA. So you pass on these mutations, and the more exposure you have to radiation or smoking or whatever that could change your DNA, the more mutations you're going to pass on. Most mutations are generally bad. They're not going to, give you wings or adamantium bones. That's right. So we have 2 copies of all of our genes, right? One you get from your mom, one you get from your dad. Sickle cell is no different. It's caused by hemoglobin mutation. So the mutation is one single point of DNA, one letter, one single letter of that whole long code causes the hemoglobin to be misshapen, and so it can't load oxygen, and when it does, it collapses, kind of like a balloon that isn't filled with air. Right? And if you have one mutation, only half of your cells are sickled, but the other ones are normal, so that's enough to sort of get you by, right? Normally. But if you have 2 mutations, both of the cells that are being made collapse, and then you end up with sickle cell anemia. We'll talk about that in chapter 14 because it's kind of complicated.
So you actually have 2 sets of cells?
No, 2 sets of instructions for every trait. We call those alleles. You might call them genes.
I have a question. So if you have an expression of a gene with mutation, are there any ways to reverse that, to repair it?
Yeah. So her question was, if you have a broken gene, is there any way to fix it? And the answer is yes and no, and we're not very good at it. And so here's an example. You guys ever heard of the boy in the bubble syndrome? It's called SCID, severe combined immune deficiency. It's something you're born with. It's very similar to HIV, except you don't have a working immune system. Well, that's caused by a single defect in a single gene. Right? So scientists decided that they were going to use a virus like this and they took away all the bad stuff from the virus and sent it in to the cells with the gene inside of it, right? The working gene. And so when they did that, it cured all of the 6 children that they did that. So that's called gene therapy. But the problem is that viruses don't like to stay where they're at. And so it would jump. And when it did, it jumped into a gene that controls the production of red blood cells. And so 5 out of those 6 children ended up getting leukemia. So they didn't have SCIDs anymore. They had leukemia. So what would you rather have? Well, what if you can't get one? What if you don't get a match? You know, we talked about the girl that in here about the bone marrow, right? They couldn't find a match, so they had to have another kid to try to match it. So I don't know. You know, it's like choosing. How do you want to die? Lethal injection or firing squad or? I don't want to choose. Can I opt out of that one? So the answer is yeah, we can do it, but we're not good at it. So scientists are working on ways to keep the viruses stable so that they don't move around. You know, other techniques to try to get DNA in their plants. They do it with plants, right? You've probably heard of genetically modified plants where they've introduced DNA from outside source. One of the bacteria that does that is one of the bacteria that I sequenced the whole genome on. It's called agrobacterium. But the first way that they did it is they actually put DNA on these tungsten little beads in a shotgun shell, and they shot the plant with it. Most of the plant died, right? But some of the plants, the little beads with the DNA on, ended up in the nucleus, right? And the plant doesn't know the difference, so it just starts making the product. Whatever the chefs in your cells, whatever it is, they cook it. They don't care. That's why you can make these weird things like glowing fish and glowing rabbits. You guys seen that? Alright, so I'm just going to show you this since we're on the topic, and then I'm going to move on. So the protein they've done it's called green fluorescent protein, and they take it out of a jellyfish. And you could put it into anything, right? You want to put it into a rabbit? Ta-da, glowing bunny, right? That's a jellyfish gene that they put in a rabbit. You want to put it into, huh?
Do they glow forever?
So they don't glow on their own. They're not like fireflies. You have to put a blue wavelength light on them, and then it causes them to glow green. But you can do it with all kinds of stuff, right? Here's some examples, I think. Here's a fruit fly. This is a worm. This plant actually has a firefly gene in it called luciferase, and when it gets thirsty, it glows. So you know when to water your plant. Here's mice, right? Here's a fish. This isn't a camera trick, right? This is really what it looks like. This is not Photoshop. This is real. These are real animals. And there's different colors. In fact, you could go to Walmart and buy these fish. I told you guys that I worked in Singapore, right? While I was there, there were graduate students that were taking zebrafish. You know what a zebra looks like, right? So the fish are the same. They're black and white stripes. And they were trying to take these genes and stick them in these zebrafish just for fun, right? So they made these fish called glowfish, and then they patented them and sold them as pets. So you could buy them at Walmart, right? Called glowfish. That, I'm not sure if that cat really has a GFP gene in it, but it wouldn't surprise me. So glowfish. So do shopping. And they have these if you go to the life science department at Southern and Dobson, there's an aquarium right outside of the office, and they have a bunch of these in there. But there they are, glowfish.
Have they tried to do it on a human?
Ooh, what's that? Well, that one has this is red fluorescent protein. It comes from a coral. You know, but if there's lots of different languages, right? But what's really cool is the language of DNA is the same. So I can take anything from any organism and put it in anything else, and it will read it just like it was its own DNA. So that's why, this is cool, but you could also take the gene for insulin and put it in a bacteria, which they've done, and make human insulin for diabetics. Before, they had to use pancreases from pigs, which have disease, right? And there's risk it's not the same. So now it's really a human gene making really human insulin. They purify it out and they sell it. It's called Humulin. And the company that does it is called Genentech. Do you know what their stock symbol is? It's 3 letters. DNA. Alright, so let's skip ahead. One of the things that's important is order, right? Living things have to be ordered. So what happens if you get disordered? If you get hit by a bus, or I throw you in a blender or something like that, you fall on a knife multiple times, you're disordered, right? So usually that kills you. But what about cancer? How does cancer kill you?
The cells don't do the same, they don't operate the same as all the other. They just do the
Right. So cancer starts as a tumor, we call that tumorigenesis. But the reason that cancer is bad is because it spreads to other regions and interferes with their ability to function. So Lance Armstrong is a good example of this. He got testicular cancer, right? And it spread to his lungs. So do you think testicle cells in your lungs help you breathe better? No, they don't. And then it moved to his brain. So here's the next question. Do testicle cells in your brain make you think better? No. It interferes with your ability for your heart to beat, right? Or your breathe, your breathing and so on and so forth. So cancer kills you by causing you to become disordered, right? It's introducing disorder into an ordered system, which is the same way that you would die if you got shot by a bullet. Does that make sense? So that's how cancer kills you. So order is really important. We got energy utilization, response to the environment. So that's really important too, right? If you need food, you're just going to sit around here because you're going to die, right? If you need water, you're just going to stay here? No, because you would die. If a tiger's chasing you, are you just going to stand there? Then you're going to die. So you need to be able to respond to your environment, right? Food, water, plants respond to light. If you have a plant, if you guys want to do this experiment at home, go get you some seeds at Walmart, put it in a pot, and then start turning the pot. That plant will always grow towards the light, no matter which way you turn it. Why? Because it's responding to its environment, right? It knows it needs light to make food, because it would die, right? Growth and development we covered. Reproduction we covered. Evolutionary adaptation. And the last one, this is super important. So your body has to have the ability to regulate its internal environment. So it has to maintain a relatively constant internal environment. What happens if you have a really high fever, let's say 107? So why does it shut down? Okay. Do you know why?
Burning brain cells.
No, in most systems, heating stuff up makes reactions go faster, right? So if I put you in the oven and I was a chemist, this is a bad example, but it should make your reactions go faster, right? If you want to get a reaction to go in chemistry lab, you just heat it up, right? But you can't do that with people because our proteins, just like that metal bar that we talked about in lab, they change shape with temperature. So if your temperature isn't in a specific range, those changes of shape will kill you. Why do you guys think you put your food in a refrigerator? Are you killing the bacteria?
Stop that from growing.
And the way that you're stopping it from growing is you're changing the shape of their proteins that they need to grow. You take it back out and you put it at room temperature where they live at, they go back to the normal shape and they start growing again. So temperature is critical. And another thing that changes shape is pH. So your blood pH has to be between 7.2 and 7.6. If it varies out of that range, you'll die. I don't know. I don't have a swimming pool. God, you're so lucky. All right. So any questions about life? This is really important because did we talk about Europa in here? I don't think we did. I think this talked about my other class, but NASA and the International Space Agency have decided that they're going to send a probe to a moon of Jupiter called Europa, right? Why are they going to do that? Right, underneath it is liquid water. So, you know, there's a lake under Antarctica called Vostok that has living things in it too. And so and that's 3 miles under the ice. So if living things can exist 3 miles under the ice on Earth, why couldn't they exist 3 miles under the ice on Europa? So they're going to spend $20 billion on a probe that's going to fly there, tunnel through the ice, and look for life in that ocean. But what's important is that there are people that work for NASA called astrobiologists, and when they send this probe out, it's not going to be able to sit there and talk back and forth. It's going to be autonomous. So it's going to be looking for life. So what are they going to program in it to tell it to look for? What if you screwed that up and it came up to life and missed it? Would that be bad? Well, why do we even care if there's life on Europa? Why do we have probes on Mars looking for life? Is that important?
Natural resources.
This is kind of Star Trek. Yeah, I mean, you know, everybody wants. Would that be a big discovery if tomorrow you woke up on the news and they said they found life on Mars? Or they found life somewhere else? I mean, that would be a huge discovery. Oh, I mean, you know, it could be little green Martians like you see on TV in the 60s. But it's life, right? So it's really important that we define life, right? And in order to study. So do you guys have any questions about what life is? All right, let's start then. So we talked about cells. Cells are the smallest unit that has all of the properties that we just defined as living. And so it turns out that because of that, all living things are made out of cells, right? And there's some living things that are single cells, so they're just a cell by themselves. And there's some living things that are multicellular. So E. coli is just one cell. It's a bacteria. You, on the other hand, are you guys single cells or multi-cells? Multi-cell. Right? So, and then your cells are specialized. So nobody knew that these cells existed until the 1600s, when this guy Robert Hooke actually built a microscope. So he didn't make the lenses or any of the other stuff. He actually ground his own lenses from glass that was blown by someone else. And he put them together in such a way that there are two lenses inside this microscope, which is similar to what we use in the lab. This is called a compound scope. It has a lens that's close to your eye. Do you guys know what the term for eye is in Latin? Ocular, right? And then this lens is closest to the object, so what do you think that lens is called? It's called the objective lens, right? So there's two lenses in here, and his microscope had a lamp, an oil lamp, and it shone through like this water flask and sort of illuminated the specimen. And so he was actually the first person to name and describe cells. This is what he drew. They didn't, back then you had to be an artist to be a biologist, right? They didn't have pictures and stuff. So he drew this out and put it in this book called Micrographia. And this is what it says in that book. So he said that the pores of it were not regular. These pores are cells. That's the first time that that word was ever used. And so that's why we call it cells. If he didn't use that, and he just used pores, we might have called cells pores. I don't know why it does that. Alright, sorry. I can't get it to work. We'll give it a second and see what happens. So anyway, if you guys want to move over here we'll slide all the. It'll probably work in a second. All right. Anyway, we don't have much time left, so I'll see if I can fix it. So this guy Leeuwenhoek, he actually he made a microscope called a simple microscope, and he had astigmatism in his eye. So you guys ever used a magnifying glass? When you make things really big, what happens? Are they clear? They get distorted, right? So this is the kind of scope that he was using, but his eyeball would readjust the focus of that distortion. So he could actually increase the magnification and see things that were smaller than Robert Hooke could. These guys lived at the same time. They were friends. They looked through each other's microscopes. Hooke said that Leeuwenhoek's microscope was an abomination to his eye because he couldn't see crap through it. Right? It was like that sucks. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you're making it up. And we don't know what Robert Hooke looked like because he thought he was hideous, and so he wouldn't let anyone paint him or draw him. But this guy, he thought he was awesome. Yeah, all kinds of pictures of him. So he was the first person with the simple microscope to observe single-celled organisms in pond water, and he also was the first person to observe red blood cells and white blood cells, and the first person to observe sperm under the microscope, although we don't know whose sperm that actually is. No documentation of that. All right. So those are the guys that sort of opened up this world that no one had ever seen before of cells, and now you guys, sort of take it for granted. But back then, this was a big deal, right? People would get microscopes, only the wealthy could really afford these, and they would have parties where they would have like wine and cheese and pull out the microscope and start looking at junk, everything, paper, hair. They were cutting off, skin. I mean, everything was new. It was like a whole nother world. And, even Shelley's Frankenstein is written based on this whole, microscopic world. And this crazy science and what was going on and all this other stuff. So, over the years, all these people that were looking at all these living things, what they realized is that everything they looked at, no matter what it was, and they documented it, that all living things were made out of cells. There was never an exception. So these guys, Schleiden and Swan, came up with a theory that basically said all living things are made out of cells. And they called that the cell theory. Okay? So I'll give you some examples of some questions I might ask you on the test. Who was the first person to name and describe cells? Robert Hooke. Who was the first person to name and describe blood cells? Leeuwenhoek. What kind of microscope did Leeuwenhoek use? What kind of microscope did Robert Hooke use? What does the cell theory say? There you go. All right. So, in 1855, Virchow, I don't care that you guys know the dates. I'm just kind of giving you an idea because I want you to realize that's really not that long ago. 170 years. Did you know that we could build an atomic bomb before we knew that DNA was our genetic material? That's pretty amazing to me. Anyway, Virchow, he came along and he said, not only are all living things made out of cells, but guess what? All cells come from other cells. So can we clone something from nothing? Can we make the elephant egg so that we can clone? What do we have to start with? We have to start with a cell. So no matter what it is, we still can't make a cell from nothing. All right. So all cells, because they remember, cells are representatives, the smallest representatives of all the things we defined as requirement. The last one on the list, you remember what that is? Homeostasis. What does that mean? Right. So like this room, it's nice in here. Earlier it was really hot outside. So how are we able to make this room at a relatively constant environment? Right. Well, your body can regulate that, but the most important thing is that, what if there are no walls here? Could you do that? You would be exposed to the environment, and whatever temperature it was outside is the temperature you'd be in here. Is that controlling your environment, or is that just being a subject of your environment? Right. So in order for cells to be able to do this homeostasis, they have to have something that encloses them. So we call that a membrane, right, which is made out of fats, or some other organisms like plants have a cell wall, so do bacteria. And so that's a little more rigid, right, a little stronger. Do you guys have a cell wall, you think? You don't. You have cell membranes, right? Do trees have cell walls? Yeah. So they're a little stronger. Go try to run down a tree. See which one wins. All right. So that's why we have a membrane, and all cells contain DNA. Let's try this now that's not blinking. Damn. Well, this technology is stupid. All right, fine. I don't need a. Oh, now that screen's on. Okay, I don't need the screen. So let's just talk about what's on the slide. So all you guys, one thing that you might not know is that all living things contain DNA, which is our instruction set, and we talked about that the language of DNA is the same, no matter if you're a fish or a tree or a human. It's all the same. Everything works the same. Right? DNA is just an instruction book. It's like a cookbook. So is a cookbook going to make you dinner? No. But the things that are made inside your body, the proteins, which what makes you what you are, those are made following the cookbook of DNA, right? So, what you really are are proteins. And I'll show you guys a video on that later whenever I can get both the... Ooh, maybe, let's see what happens. Huh? Huh? Alright, so there are two kinds of cells. There are what we call ones that have a true nucleus, which are eukaryotes, and then ones that don't have a nucleus, and those are called, do you remember? Prokaryotes. Good. So the only prokaryotes are the bacteria, and we classify those in the kingdom Monera. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. That's in your book. Everything else is a eukaryote. So protists, and we'll look at those in the kingdom Protista, animals, plants, and then fungus. Prokaryote, yeah, it's on the screen. It's PRO, right? bacteria, and then fungi, right? You guys know the joke? Mushroom walks into a bar. Bartender says, "Hey, we don't serve your kind in here." He goes, "What's wrong? I'm a fungi." All right, fine. All right, so the prokaryotes are all bacteria, and we classify those into two groups. So one is called the Archaea. You guys know something that's archaic? What does that mean? Old and ancient. So you probably heard that in the beginning the Earth was, not a very nice place to live. We didn't have the oxygen and everything that we have now. And so the bacteria that we think that lived in ancient times are bacteria that live in extreme environments, like the hot springs in Yellowstone, right, close to boiling. Extremophiles, right. So bacteria that live at the bottom of the Lake Vostok, right, 3 miles under the ice in Antarctica. Bacteria that live in really salty environments. There are bacteria, and I think we talked about this, that can live on spent fuel rods. They're called radiobacter, right? So there's lots of environments that were really harsh, and they think that these bacteria exploited these areas, so they're extremophiles. And then eubacteria, or true bacteria, right? Those are the ones that came later. So those are the ones that don't live in extreme conditions, like E. coli, for example. Like, you might think living in a colon is pretty extreme, but they like it, right? There's plenty of food and shelter and what? So all living things have DNA. The only exception is viruses. Some viruses have RNA, but all living things, including the prokaryotes, they all use DNA. And they all have the same code. Not the same order of letters, right? I mean, DNA has 4 letters. And we're going to talk about that soon anyway. A, G, C, and T. How many letters in our alphabet? 26. Good. 26 letters. And so, but you can make, is there only 26 words we can make? I could use the same 3 letters and make 2 different words, right? I could make rat and tar. Does that mean the same thing? So what's important with the letters? The order, right? Same thing with DNA. So we change the order of the letters, but that's English, right? Rat and tar. And so in the cellular molecular world, all living things use the same language. So if that were English or Arabic or whatever it was, everything reads the same language. So if I wrote out tar, that bacteria would read it as tar, right? And it's how that DNA is arranged. All right. What time is it? It is. All right. So that's the end of my session. We will pick this up on Tuesday. So remember, no school Monday? Hooray! So have a good long weekend, and I'll see you guys on Tuesday. You can go out that way. What? So I went to Guatemala, actually.
I just came back to Jamaica. I saw the biggest tick I've ever seen in my life.
Really?
It was next to a volcano, like a water spreader.
The Arenal?
Yeah. Thing was this big, red, fuzz around it. I was riding the mule too. And take the mule,
I
don't take
just had a visual.
Mule was very small compared to me.
That's what I'm saying.
I don't know why they gave me mule, it's kind of worse.
So when's your office hour on Tuesday?
Right before lecture. So 7:30 to 8:20.
Okay, what's your?
I don't don't know. I don't remember.
I can read the syllabus, it's okay.
I'm never here, so I don't really remember.
I know how to, under the syllabus tab. Okay, so I didn't know if should I just send you an email and let you know that I'm going to be there too? You know, understand.
Okay. So repeat the question. What?
Because you said to come see you on Tuesday for the honors. I can just bring it to class. Or
Can you come before class so we can talk about your project in my office?
right.
Okay.
That's what I was asking.
Yes, I will be there. So it's All right. Yeah, I have office hours on Tuesdays.
Is there a way to like force the mutation successfully of the CCR5?
And humans,
Yeah.
it's possible, but it would require the same sort of gene therapy
Yeah.
and so that's
So it's the
still
same,
risky.
like, okay.
You know, I mean, it's really